You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. On today's episode we're reviewing the Sheffield Shield Final between South Australia and Queensland. For the first time since 1995-96, South Australia have tasted Sheffield Shield's success after years of disappointment and agony in the Sheffield Shield. A real team effort, Dogged's 11 wickets, Lehmann's 100, Carey and Sangha's 100 in the match-winning partnership in the run chase were the highlights for South Australia in this wonderful Sheffield Shield win. And being a South Australian myself, it was a wonderful moment to watch as a fellow South Australian. And for South Australia, they really earned and deserved their victory. 30 long years is long enough not to win a Sheffield Shield, and they played really well. For Queensland, on the other hand, disappointment, agony, the emotions of losing a Shield final. It's not where you want to be. You want to be on the winning side. But for Queensland, if we're honest, they were behind in this game, getting bowled out for 95 on day one, batting first after South Australia chose to bowl first on a very flat Karen Rolton oval surface. They did well to fight throughout the 4 days. They fought hard, especially in the second innings, to try and set up this game for them and make it challenging, setting South Australia 270 to win. But in the end, South Australia were far too good, and they were probably the best team all Shield season. And the results and the numbers certainly back that up. And it was an amazing game of cricket. Obviously me being a South Australian fan, being from South Australia, watching the final as I did over the 4 days, it was encapsulating cricket, enthralling, intense at times. There were ebbs and flows, arm wrestle between the two teams. But what a game of cricket it was. And in the end, I'm glad that South Australia won for obvious reasons. So plenty to talk about, plenty to discuss as we unpacked and talk about this Sheffield Shield final and how South Australia and Queensland went about their business in this Shield final and how this game pretty much got people back interested in Sheffield Shield cricket once again. And the pictures of the crowd running onto the ground and embracing the South Australian players when Sangha hit the winning runs for the winning moment just shows you that people still care about the Sheffield Shield. And I suppose that is a positive. So plenty to talk about, plenty to discuss in this episode of the podcast today. Without further ado, let's get straight into it. Let's have a look at the match summary and have a look back at how the 4 days unfolded from this Sheffield Shield final between South Australia and Queensland from the Karen Rolton Oval. Queensland batted first and were bowled out for 95 in their first innings. Michael Nessa top scored with 34. Brendan Doggett was outstanding with the ball, taking 6 wickets for South Australia. South Australia, in response to Queensland's first innings, were bowled out for 271. Jake Lehmann top scored with 102, a superb century from him. And the young fast bowler Callum Fiedler took 4 wickets for Queensland. Queensland in their second innings were bowled out for 445. Jack Wildermuth top scored with 111. And Brendan Doggett took 5 wickets for South Australia to end up with match figures of 11 wickets for the match. South Australia, they were set 270 to win by Queensland. They chased it down with ease, finishing on 6 for 270. Jason Sangha top scored with 126 not out, and Mark Steckity took 3 wickets for Queensland. South Australia won by 4 wickets, and Brendan Doggett was named the player of the match for his 11 wickets in this Sheffield Shield final, and rightly deserved as well. So that's pretty much how this Sheffield Shield final unfolded for the Sheffield Shield final between South Australia and Queensland from the Karen Rolton Oval. Now, let's talk about the key moments and the key factors. The moments that really decided how this Sheffield Shield final went in favour of South Australia. There were so many ebbs and flows, so many momentum changes throughout the 4 days of this Sheffield Shield final. Many key moments that were pivotal in terms of the end result and South Australia getting the job done. Well, Queensland getting bowled out for 95 was a key moment, and obviously South Australia bowling first, winning the toss. Many people would say you probably want to bat first in a final, probably not bowl first. But South Australia knew that the surface here at the Carraralton Oval is a pretty good surface to bat on. It's going to get easier as the game progressed, and that's what we saw in the final. So they did very well, South Australia, to bowl Queensland out for 95. That was a key moment. That allowed South Australia to get a lead, a key first innings lead of 176 in the first innings. The hundreds from Clayton and Wildermuth in Queensland's second innings allowed Queensland to try and set something up for South Australia to chase down in the last innings of this Sheffield Shield final. Those hundreds from Clayton and Wildermuth allowed Queensland to set South Australia 270 runs to win. So those two innings from those two batters for Queensland was so important in terms of their chances of trying to win this game. Probably the most pivotal key moment in this final was the drop catch, and that was of Jason Sangha. Jason Sangha dropped early on in the run chase. Mark Steckity was bowling. Sangha nicked it straight to the slips, and unfortunately for Ben McDermott, he was the one that put him down. And at the time, Sangha was on 13, and it was the 18th over of the run chase. South Australia would have been 4 for 37. But as we know, that was the telling moment in this final, really. That could have been a lot different if that catch was taken. So a missed opportunity there for Queensland. Look what happened. The other key moment in this game was the Sangha and Carey partnership. 202 for the fourth wicket. Pretty much sealed the game in the final for South Australia and pretty much got them home in the end to chase down 270. So those key moments and key factors did have a part to play in how the Sheffield Shield final pretty much resulted in South Australia winning this game. But, you know, we say it very often in cricket, you know, key moments, key factors, they do have an impact on how the end result will pan out. And for South Australia, those key moments went their way, and they were able to win the final. So those were some of the key moments and pivotal moments that really decided how this Sheffield Shield final went in South Australia's favour. Let's talk about how South Australia and Queensland went about their business in this Sheffield Shield final. Have a look at both teams and their performances with the bat and with the ball, which of the players stood up and really made a name for themselves in this Sheffield Shield final. There were a few players that had standout performances on both sides. We'll start with the home team and champions, of course, South Australia, and talk about their performance. Well, it was a very team-spirited performance. Everyone contributed in this final for South Australia, and for the first time since 1995-96, when they drew the final against WA, South Australia have won their 14th Sheffield Shield title. And it's probably one of their best out of the 14 for South Australia. And I think many people would say that this Sheffield Shield win against Queensland, this final, is probably the best that South Australia won out of the 14 that they've won in the Sheffield Shield's history. Because of how, you know, they were underdogs, and obviously, you know, the challenges that we know of South Australia over the years in Shield cricket. You know, not winning the Shield for more than 30 years. The story with that, and how this team came from, you know, those challenges and setback to lift up the Shield and win this final is a great achievement. Obviously for South Australia, it's their first Sheffield Shield final since, well, 2016-17, where they drew the final against Victoria, and Victoria went out the winners that year. But also South Australia were in the previous final of that year as well, 2015-16, where they lost to Victoria again by 7 wickets. So South Australia have had their opportunities over the years in Sheffield Shield finals. Obviously 2016-17, 2015-16 against Victoria. On both occasions they fell short, as I just mentioned before. But to finally get the job done, to finally, you know, get the job done and win the Shield is a great achievement in itself. And as I said, you know, years of disappointment. I think the change of coach, Ryan Harris, the change of captain, Nathan McSweeney, has really made a difference to how South Australia have played this season. And that often happens when you have a change of coach, you have a change of captain, the players that South Australia have brought in, from interstate, Jason Sangha, Menenti, McAndrew, Doggett, they've all come from interstate. They've come from New South Wales and Queensland. They've really made a difference in how the South Australian team have performed all season. And, a change of attitude as well. And I think that's why South Australia have been successful this Shield season. Ryan Harris, as coach, has really changed the attitude. South Australia didn't win a Sheffield Shield match for like 2 years or something like that. So he changed the attitude at the start of the season. He said to the lads, well, basically, let's try and win. Let's change the attitude, positive self-talk, not be negative all the time. We're capable, we're good enough. And if we can play our best cricket, we can be at the business end of the tournament or the competition and lift up the Sheffield Shield. And that's what they did. And that's really had an impact on how South Australia have performed this season. So let's talk about their batting and bowling performances. We'll start with the batting side of things for South Australia. The first innings was pretty good. 271 they scored in the first innings. They got a lead of 176 on the first innings after Queensland were bowled out for 95. A very good 100 from Jake Lehmann. His third century of... his fourth century of the season. And he batted well. Good support from Ben Menenti in a partnership of 72 for the 7th wicket. McAndrew, 85 for the 8th wicket. So he had good support there, Lehmann, with his 100. But just like we saw with Queensland when they got bowled out for 95, South Australia, their batting was a little bit rocky as well. Number of factors. Number one, Sheffield Shield Final, the nerves, the expectations. People want South Australia to win, especially the very parochial crowd at the Karen Rolton Oval during the Sheffield Shield Final. So they had an opportunity to back Queensland out of the game. You usually think in conventional wisdom when it comes to cricket, when you bowl a side out in the first innings for a low score, under 100, like South Australia did for 95 for Queensland, you would think that South Australia will make the most of it and probably back Queensland out of the game. Unfortunately, that didn't quite go to plan, but they did well to get a lead of 176. It could have been a lot more. It could have been like 350, 300 plus to back Queensland out of the game and try and win by an innings. But given, the nerves and the batting was a little bit tentative, they did well to recover from, I think there were, 7 for 184 to recover from that to 271 all out. To get a lead of 176 was pretty good. Obviously, Jake Lehmann was outstanding in that 102 he made. And good support. As I mentioned before, the partnerships with Menenti and McAndrew, 72 and 85 respectively, for the 7th and 8th wicket partnerships. Now, the run chase, obviously 272 win. South Australia, it was going to be probably one of the highest run chases in Sheffield Shield cricket when it comes to the final. And we've got to remember that the Sheffield Shield Final has only been in place for 40 odd years, since the 1980s. So in its history of the Sheffield Shield Final, 270 was going to be the highest run chase to be achieved. And South Australia knew the challenge, but they also backed themselves on a very flat Karen Rolton Oval surface to get the job done. And they did. In the end, they got the job done, all thanks to superb hundreds from Sangha and Carey and that partnership of 202 for the 4th wicket. But you've got to remember that they were in a bit of trouble early on. They were 3 down for 28, South Australia. They lost Hunt, McSweeney very early on. And then they lost McInerney as well early on. They were in a bit of trouble, South Australia, in that second innings. 3 down for 28. They could have been 4 down if Jason Sangha was held on by Ben McDermott. He was dropped on 13 by McDermott. It was the 18th over of the run chase. South Australia could have been 4 for 37 at that stage, and that was the turning point in the match. Jason Sangha went on to score 126 not out. Obviously hit the winning runs at the end. He had a superb partnership with Carey who made 202 in that 4th wicket partnership, and also Alex Carey scoring yet again another 100 in this Sheffield Shield season, his 4th 100 of the season. So it's a very good innings from Carey, and really that partnership with Sangha was the turning point in the game. So yeah, that's how South Australia performed with the bat, really. Jason Sangha, and we talked about it earlier, about the interstate players coming from interstate to play for South Australia, making an impact. We saw that with Jason Sangha coming from New South Wales. He didn't have many opportunities there. Coming to South Australia, he's really made this season his own. We saw that in this Sheffield Shield final. A brilliant 126 not out. 704 runs this Sheffield Shield season for Jason Sangha at an average of 78 with 300s, including the one in the final. His calmness, he was calm with Carey there. They knew what they needed to do. 3 down for 28. Right, let's knuckle down. Let's get through this new ball. Once it gets softer, hit the 30 over mark. We know how it plays here at Carlton Oval, and we can definitely go and really put Queensland to the sword. And that's what Sangha and Carey did, especially after lunch on day 4. Queensland were a bit ragged in the field. There were a few misfields. There was an overthrow that went for 5. And really, the momentum was sucked out of Queensland, and the momentum was with South Australia. And Sangha and Carey really put the pressure on Queensland after that tea break on day 4. So Sangha batted well. Obviously, hopefully for him, this will kickstart his push to represent Australia, hopefully in Test cricket. He's got the talent. We've seen that in this final. And obviously when you play well in a Sheffield Shield final, people take notice. And definitely the selectors will probably take notice of Sangha and what he's done in this final, especially in the run chase, scoring that 100. Alex Carey, what can you say about Carey? Cool, calm, collective. He's in a brilliant touch, Carey. We've seen that over the last year or so. Carey just come in and score runs. We saw that in Sri Lanka recently. During the test series against Sri Lanka, he played well in the second test. He scored 156. The Champions Trophy, he scored runs there as well, Carey. His keeping has gone to another level. His batting has gone to another level. And just a magnificent performance by him in the final here with Sangha. It was a very good, partnership. 202 for the 4th wicket. Very aggressive in the Alex Carey way. Took it on. Played some very good shots. And, when Mitchell Swepson was bowling to him, he played the sweep and reverse sweep very well, as we saw in Sri Lanka recently. But for Alex Carey, I wasn't surprised by the way that Carey batted in this run chase. It sort of reminded me of when he came in that test match in the run chase in New Zealand, which was last year in that test match, the second test of that series in Christchurch, where he made 98 not out, batting with Pat Cummins. Carey, has that calmness about him. He wasn't flustered. He knew what the job was. Obviously combined well with Sangha, and both of them were able to get the job done and get South Australia over the line. So, Carey, good innings from him. Also, Jake Lehmann, the 100 for him. He's been in good touch all Shield season. 750 runs at an average of 44. 400s for Lehmann this season. His 100 was pivotal in the first innings. And did very well. So it was a very good batting performance by South Australia, especially in the second innings of the run chase, mainly because of Sangha and Carey in that partnership. And they really made Queensland pay for that missed opportunity that they had when Jason Sangha was dropped on 13 off Ben McDermott off the bowling of Steketee. And they really made them pay. So South Australia did well there in the batting side of things. The bowling side of things, the bowlers did well. On a very flat surface, the bowlers toiled hard, especially, winning the toss, bowling first on day 1, getting Queensland out for 95 was a fantastic result. That was led by Brendan Doggett. He took 6 wickets and, 6 for 31 and 11.5 overs. The second innings was a little bit difficult. Obviously, the pitch was flat. Queensland batted a bit better than they did in the first innings, and obviously it was very tough for South Australia to take wickets. But what I liked about their bowling performance in the second innings is they stuck at it. They didn't give up. The bowlers were tiring. They bowled a lot of overs in this game, especially the seamers. Scott, McAndrew, Doggett, Buckingham, they bowled a lot of overs in the second innings. 20 plus to 30 overs plus. But they found it tough because Queensland batted better than they did in the first innings, obviously. That's usually what's going to happen when a side gets bowled out for 95 or a low score in the first innings. Of course, they're going to bat better in the second innings because they know where they went wrong. But for South Australia to bowl them out for 445, Queensland that is, and to keep them to a target that was below 300, in the end 270 was a good result for South Australia. So the bowling effort was very spirited, especially on a flat surface, but they did their job and they took wickets. And that was mainly led by Brendan Doggett. 11 wickets for the match, and obviously player of the match in the final. Best, match figures in a Sheffield Shield final, going past Tasmania's Shane Jurgensen's 11 for 172 in that Shield final in 2001-2002 when Tasmania played Queensland, and Brendan Doggett now has the record. He bowled very well. He pretty much led the bowling attack from day one. In that effort of South Australia bowling Queensland out for 95, that was a good result, and that was pretty much where South Australia got the momentum in this final, and he led the way in both innings. 11 wickets in a Shield final. You must be doing something good. So he bowled really well, Doggett. So overall, it was a very spirited bowling performance by South Australia, and overall, their performance in this final, it was a team effort. Everyone contributed. Everyone played their role. Sangha, Carey were outstanding in that partnership in the run chase. Lehman in the first innings. The bowlers stuck at it. Doggett led the way. He had good support from McAndrew and Buckingham and Scott and Menenti. South Australia, by far the best team in this Shield season and deserved to win. So for South Australia, I think they'll be very pleased with their performance. They'll be pleased that they were able to get the job done and finally break the drought and finally claim their first Sheffield Shield for the first time since 1995-1996. Let's move on from South Australia and talk about Queensland and their performance in this Sheffield Shield final. Well, it's not great when you lose. Obviously, on the losing side, you'll be disappointed. Queensland will be disappointed. But I suppose after getting bowled out for 95 on day one, they showed a lot of fight and spirit, especially in the second innings, and trying to set up this game to try and make it difficult for South Australia, try and set them a difficult target to chase. But really, on a flat surface, 270 in the end wasn't enough. And we'll talk about that right now. Let's talk about their batting performance. First of all, Queensland, all out for 95 on day one, was not a good result. Batting first, South Australia won the toss, chose to bowl first. You really want to make the most of that if you were Queensland. But bowled out for 95 on a very flat surface. Yes, day one of a, first-class match or a test match. Of course, with the new ball, you're going to get a little bit in the surface. The ball's going to move around a little bit of swing, bit of seam. But really, it was a flat surface, and it didn't do much. And, Queensland all out for 95. Michael Nessa was really the highlight in that innings, 34 off 37. He really batted comfortably. Whereas his other teammates failed with the bat, and that showed. It wasn't a 95 all-out surface. That really put Queensland on the back foot. It really wasn't a 95 all-out surface. And we saw that as the game progressed. It was a really good batting surface. The scores, and, I think we had 500s in the game. Sangha, Carey, Lehman, Clayton, and Wildermuth. It just shows that it was a really good batting surface if 5 batters are scoring hundreds. So that really put Queensland back. A number of factors when it comes to that. Probably nerves. You're a bit nervous. Obviously, it's the Sheffield Shield final. You're batting first. You know it's a flat surface at Carlton Oval. South Australia have given you an opportunity because they won the toss, chose to bowl first, which surprised a lot of people. But for Queensland, they couldn't make the most of it. So probably a bit of nerves, maybe, all the scrutiny that's come to Queensland, obviously, during the week in the lead up to the final, obviously with the Usman Khawaja sort of situation there with him and Queensland cricket and all that stuff. Maybe that played a part as well. But mainly probably just nerves and a lot of the dismissals were very poor shot selection, poor decision making, and probably very tentative with the bat, Queensland. And that can often happen when you're nervous. You can be a bit tentative, you can play with hard hands, you can go searching for the ball rather than waiting for the ball to come to you. You can reach and search for the ball. And I think that's what many of the batters did, especially in that first innings. And that's why they were bowled out for 95. But in the end, it wasn't a 95 all-out surface. But they were facing a 176-run deficit on the first innings. But they knew if they could bat well, they could easily wipe that deficit down because of the surface. It's a very flat surface at Carlton Oval. If we can get past the 30-over mark, blunt the new ball, we can definitely get some runs and really put South Australia under the pump, which they did. 445 they scored at the second innings, Queensland. That was mainly down to hundreds from Clayton and Wildermuth. They had a good partnership between them of 103 for the 7th wicket. And then obviously Jack Wildermuth and Mark Steckety, the tail ender, scored a half century. And that partnership went for 112 for the 8th wicket. So they were able to wipe out that deficit and set South Australia 270 runs to win, which in the end wasn't enough, as we know, because South Australia chased it down with 6 wickets down and won by 4 wickets. 270, not enough. Even when I was watching the final myself and seeing that target being posted by Queensland, I thought, it's probably not going to be enough, given the surface, given the nature of the surface, the flatness of the surface, not doing much. It didn't really spin, didn't really break up. There was no seam or swing movement. Probably wasn't going to be enough for Queensland. They needed Clayton, they needed Wildermuth to go on with their innings. Both of them scored 100 and 111. That's great, but you need big hundreds. And they weren't able to do that. They got out soon after they made their 100. Clayton, as soon as he made his 100, he got out to Menenti LBW soon after, which was, what happened to him. He couldn't go on with his innings. Wildermuth the same, couldn't go on. And, if those two went on and scored big hundreds, they could have posted something over 300, maybe 350 plus. That would have been challenging for South Australia. But in the end, they got out, which wasn't ideal. And obviously Queensland, in the end, did well to make 270. So I think for Queensland, really with their batting, what really set them back was the first innings. Bowled out for 95, really set them back. But in terms of the second innings, they did well to post 270 and set that for South Australia to win in terms of a target. But in the end, it wasn't challenging enough. And obviously Sangha and Carey did what they did in that partnership, and that was the end of that. So the batting for Queensland, bit of a contrast. The first innings was very poor, but the second innings was much better. The bowling performance, the bowlers did well, I suppose, in this game. On a very challenging surface that didn't offer much. The bowled South Australia out for 271 in the first innings, only conceded a lead of 176 was a good result. Callum Vidler, the young fast bowler from Queensland, led the way, took 4 wickets. I thought he bowled really well. Wildermuth chipped in with 3 wickets and a wicket for Nessa and, Steckety and Swepson. So the bowlers did well in the first innings to keep the lead under 200. Because it could have been a big lead if South Australia really batted well in the first innings, and that was an opportunity that they let slip. If South Australia were able to, go on and really score a big first innings lead, it could have been disastrous for Queensland. But the bowlers did well to keep it to a 176 run lead, which in the end was a good result, especially on this flat surface, and that gave Queensland a chance to bat better in their second innings and try and set up the game, which they eventually did, but unfortunately the result didn't quite go their way, as we know. The run chase. They started well, Queensland, defending 270. Queensland were in the game, but as we know, that wasn't to be. They started well. South Australia 3 down for 28 in the run chase. Early wickets were lost. McInerney gone, Hunt gone, McSweeney gone. 3 for 28 in 15.4 overs was a very good result for Queensland to start this run chase. Mark Steckity being the chief destroyer, taking 2 of the 3 wickets at that stage of the fall. They started well, but then the key moment, the most pivotal moment in the match, was the Jason Sangha drop catch on 13 by Ben McDermott off the bowling of Steckity. The 18th over, and South Australia could have been 4 for 37. If that catch was taken, it could have been a lot different. Queensland could have been the Sheffield Shield winners. And it's a bit of a cliche, as we know in cricket, but catches win matches, and they do, really. And for Queensland, if they held on to that catch, who knows? They could have gone on to win. They may have still lost. But in cricket, key moments come. You have to take those key opportunities. And they didn't. Look what happened. Sangha combined with Carey. Partnership at 202, 4th wicket, game done. And took the game away from Queensland. And really, Queensland's bowling after tea on day 4 was really ragged. They looked like maybe they resigned to the fact that this partnership's taken the game away from us. Yes, they did pick up wickets towards the end as South Australia were getting closer and closer of chasing the runs down. But unfortunately, after lunch for Queensland, they didn't start well. Sangha and Carey really took the attack to them. There was some poor fielding. They were pretty ragged. I think there was an overthrow that went for 5. They ran a single. And then it went for 4 overthrows, so 5 runs off that delivery. That's not a good sign. So that's usually an indication of the fielding side, probably wavering a bit in their belief of trying to win the game. And that's why, Queensland were a bit ragged after tea, because, Sangha and Carey wanted to finish off the job. They knew that this partnership, was getting them closer and closer to that target of 270. Queensland were tiring, the bowlers were getting tired, the pitch was flat, the ball was old, not doing much, swing freely. And that's what Sangha and Carey did. Queensland, their bowling performance in the second innings, they just couldn't pick up the wickets, given the surface, the nature of the surface, the flatness of the surface and all those factors, and obviously Sangha and Carey batting well, the belief, the attitude, the mindset is starting to waver. And that's what happened, and that's why they collapsed with the ball quite badly. And South Australia were able to get the job done in the end with the run chase. But, if they look back on this game, Queensland, the key moments, the drop catch of Sangha was pivotal. They created some half chances. If those chances went to hand, it could have been a different result. But that's in hindsight. That's the beauty of hindsight. But, for Queensland, they'll be disappointed. But I suppose overall, they should be proud of their spirit and fight. To get bowled out for 95 on day 1, to score 400 plus in the second innings to try and set up the game. They really fought hard. They really made it hard for South Australia. So I think Marnus Labuschagne talked about that after the game. He was pretty happy as captain to see the team really embrace that fighting spirit, and unfortunately they were on the losing side. But you can't fault their effort, you can't fault their spirit, but their batting in the first innings cost them, and the drop catch of Sangha was pivotal. If they did those 2 things well and took those opportunities, it could have been a different result. Unfortunately it wasn't, and in the end they should be proud of their fight and spirit. Some of my final thoughts from this Sheffield Shield final, my final thoughts and observations from the game, and what did I take out from this Sheffield Shield final. What a Sheffield Shield final we had between South Australia and Queensland. It's probably the best we've had in the last few years. A game that ebbed and flowed throughout, and all results possible heading into the last session on day 4. After years of heartache and despair, South Australia have once again tasted Sheffield Shield's success. All season, they were the best team and deserved their victory. Hopefully, this can kickstart many more Sheffield Shield wins for South Australia in the years to come. For Queensland, they will be disappointed to lose this final, but after being bowled out for 95, they showed good fight throughout the 4 days. With people doubting whether or not the Shield final has a place or not, this Sheffield Shield final between South Australia and Queensland has reaffirmed it still has a place in the Sheffield Shield. Thanks everyone for listening to our review of the Sheffield Shield final between South Australia and Queensland. If you're watching or listening to this episode of the podcast on our YouTube channel, let us know your thoughts on the Sheffield Shield final between South Australia and Queensland in the comments. We would love to hear what you have to say. Thanks for watching and listening. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.